I think the world needs more examples of masculine men who have taken the inner journey of discovering the power of their feelings, of vulnerability, of embodiment, and their capacity to participate in real partnership. I noticed these qualities in today's guest and had a first time conversation with him that flowed so easily and ended up highlighting some intimate real life moments that you may recognize from your own life too. Feel free to let me know what you got out of today's episode with men's coach David Chambers. Welcome, everyone, to this provocative and heartfelt podcast, Beyond Patriarchal Sex, a place for both women and men to elevate ourselves, finding out what it takes to live beyond our conditioning and assumptions, not only for ourselves, but also for the coming generations. My name is Devashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these conversations. All right. So, everyone, I'm here today with the authentic man, David Chambers, who is a men's dating and intimacy relationship coach. David, thank you so much for saying yes to the invitation to coming and talking with me here.
No, it's a pleasure, Devashi. A pleasure to come on the podcast and talk about such an important topic as well. Really, when you reached out, I was like, oh, I almost felt this like tingle of like, oh, is this something I can really talk about? And and I listened to a couple of your episodes, and I was like, I definitely have a perspective to share. And I think it's one of those topics we don't talk about enough, right? As men, especially, we're afraid to talk about the patriarchy. We're trying to talk about patriarchal sex because, what I notice in myself when I'm like, oh, what have I done wrong? Comes up. Oh, have I done some of these things? Does that make me a bad man? Oh, and I have to kind of contend with that, like in my own being.
I love it that you felt that and you're still here because you stand out, David, as one of the men who can honestly and vulnerably meet that and still say, yes, I'm going to step into this conversation because it's important, and
Mm.
that says so much about who you are and your capacity to guide other men. So I'm really happy to highlight you here as one of the men that is actually capable of guiding men through the shadow and the fears that come up around the subject, because I get what can come up, and I don't want to water it down because the term patriarchal sex needs to be comprehended. And at the same time, as you can see from my approach and how I've talked with other guests, that this is actually just as much in favor of men as it is women, because men
Mm.
are massively losing out when they're stuck in that paradigm.
Most definitely. Most definitely. I speak to a lot of men like that.
Yes. But I'm going to say a little about your bio so everyone can understand a little bit more about where you've come from and your work. So you share that you came to this work because you were tired of the pain and emotional turmoil of failed relationships and fear that was holding you back from commitment. And you actually started being a relationship and dating coach in 2007. But it seems like, helping men feel confident was not the deeper level that you were meant to be working on. And so after your own relationship challenges, you went and learned with lots of world experts and took yourself much deeper. And then here you are presenting the authentic man with the coaching and the podcast that you have. And I love how you shared this. You said you've completely reshaped your view of masculinity and that you no longer believe that sharing feelings is weak. And in fact, allowing yourself to be vulnerable takes genuine courage. And yes, it does. And most importantly, you know that when sex transcends physical action, it becomes a deep spiritual and energetic connection that can be incredibly healing for both men and women. So when I noticed this level of consciousness in you, I thought I have to ask you to come and meet me here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Life has taken me on many different directions and turns. And just, shaped how I view the world and I view relationships and I view love in a way that's really shifted from the imprint that I received as a young man, as a young boy.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm starting to ask this question to everyone at this point. Would you be willing to share what is your definition of what patriarchal sex is?
Mm, God. I was thinking about this, and I think I see the kind of we see the patriarchy or patriarchal as this kind of idea of men holding power, and I think that's definitely a piece of it, or men centric as well. But I also think there's another aspect that I see a lot that's about kind of success and winning and getting and taking. And I think that's the predominant thing I kind of see when it comes to sex. It's like patriarchal sex is this like success, winning, taking. Um, and kind of getting not so much getting to the end. I think the phrase I'm looking for is um it's almost like measures of success, clear measures of success, orgasm, ejaculation, like winning, I won, I got what I wanted to get. And I think that's the kind of paradigm that I see kind of patriarchal sex through.
Yes, so the conquering that comes with it as
Mm,
well. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and the
yeah.
hierarchy. Yes. Mm. And I mean, you grew up in a social structure where that is pretty much a dominant force. And can you describe, if you're willing, what it was like growing up, seeing and sensing that this is the paradigm that you're walking into, like from a boy growing into a man? Maybe just even like a couple examples of how this plays out. I suppose any impressions that you were given around entitlement,
Mm,
especially
mm.
women and women's bodies, maybe.
Yeah, I think I look back at the music that I grew up listening to, especially, right? And I grew up, I was a young boy in the 90s. I remember the year 1999 and 2000. So I was listening to music at that time. It was like, mostly, hip hop, rap, gangster rap, um, East Coast, West Coast rap. And in the UK, we have something that's kind of emerged out of garage and grime music. So a lot of that kind of fueled my opinion of music. And so opinion of women and sex, right? And then I come from my both my parents are Jamaican, so I also grew up, especially in my later years of choice, listening to kind of dancehall music, right? Dancehall, not even reggae, dancehall music, and it's very sexual music. All of them talking about women and sex as really as something that I have to say is something that men do to women, right? I did this to her. She did this to me. It's not ever in a language of co-creation. It's not in a language of like, we're creating something beautiful and intimate and connected. It can sound very takeaway and throwaway, like a conquering a man is, and is a man's value is often viewed through this music and through, the lifestyle, not so much lifestyle, the young, men and kind of young men I was around into kind of my late teens and 20s viewing sex as something that you have to go and get, and by getting lots of sex that you were a kind of like quote unquote successful man, and I definitely see myself where I fell into this and seeing it as like, oh, I get kind of like acknowledgement and brownie points from men around me by telling my stories of again quote unquote conquering, right? And for a young man like me who grew up with my dad is somewhat absent in my life. He's very emotionally absent, but to some degree also kind of physically absent. There was no guidance to how to be a man. So I had to figure this out through how do I figure out how to be a man when you're, an 18, 19, 20-year-old man. You look to the people that you look up to that have the things you want, right? And in that era, it was mainly music, less, it's more sport, kind of sports people and so forth only start to come to the fore in maybe the last kind of, 20, 15 years or so. So it was a lot of it was like music was the influence that you were taking the ideas of how to speak to women and so forth. And then I found myself working kind of in the what we kind of call now the pickup industry. And way back there in 20 years ago, it was a very different space. I don't know it so well now, but it was a very different space. I came to men who really wanted to understand women more, but there was often men that I would meet that didn't have an interest in really like loving women and connecting deeply with them, who actually had the opinion of wanting to just get sex, or more to the point, seek revenge for the bullying that they received, or seek revenge for the kind of rejection they experienced as young men. So this was a real cocktail of like, oh, okay, I want to have sex. I love having sex. And I started to notice even then how I was connected with women, the evolution started to see was I was very curious in exploring my sexuality with the women I was with and exploring with them. And it made for really beautiful kind of learning of what women love, not as a blanket thing, but through the women that I was with, understanding their bodies intricately as like a play and a dance. Um, but it was still inside of this thing of like chasing sex as a means of validation and gaining self-worth.
Mm, yeah. And could you describe, because you're so willing to share your personal experience, what was it like to kind of wake up out of the dominant culture influence? Like, how did it feel on the inside to realize there was a different way to approach women, and how did that look different in your intimate connections?
Mm. Yeah, I think it kind of happened at different stages. I think there was a point in my kind of mid-20s when I realized I didn't need to really be afraid of women. I didn't need to try and not so much coerce, but I didn't need to impress them to connect with them. And is there was this point I remember a friend of mine, a good friend of mine now, we started my podcast together, where we were running this like 1 2 hour workshop about the importance of having fun to these guys who wanted to go to clubs and bars to pick up women. We were like, no, if you're having fun and you're enjoying yourself, like really enjoying yourself, bringing people into your fun to enjoy your fun with them becomes a really natural process. And we started to see this shift in like, oh, women are really attracted to men who are enjoying themselves, that like actually are enjoying themselves in their lives and living lives that really. And I started to see, oh, it's about this connection of joy and fun and play, but I was still also operating from this kind of mindset of trying to kind of sleep with as many women as I could. And it probably took, a couple of relations, failed relationships, and probably took another probably 8 or 9 years for me to kind of be like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't actually serve me. That doesn't serve me. Where that's coming from is an old paradigm of how I need to be as a man that isn't no longer there. And I think mixed in with kind of the Me Too occurring and having some really frank conversations with some of my like one of my good friends about, oh my God, how what sort of man have we been? You know, are there times where is there a woman out there? There's a question we discussed at length. Is there a woman out there that feels that we took advantage of her, not together, but individually, or that would look at me and go, oh, David raped me? Is there a woman out there? Can I be sure of that? And I was like, I can't be sure of that, right? Because I can't be sure of another person's perception of a situation that would, to me, felt completely consensual. But it left these conversations left me to think really like, okay, how have I been? What can I start to shift and change in how I'm approaching? What assumptions am I making about sex and women? Like, I grew up on this kind of idea of like playing hard to get. Women play hard to get, being told this by other women, being told this by people around me, and you start to look and go, wait a minute, is that actually true? And start to kind of shift and go, well, if I believe I'm in even in that belief of women play hard to get, that's this like icky dynamic, isn't it? Of like, am I not seeing them as equal, or am I seeing them as above me, and that they hold the keys to sex, and I need to kind of like scramble up the ladder and like obtain it in some way. Um, so there's some big shifts that just kind of happened mentally and how I was engaging and started the conversations I was having with the men in my life. Not all of the men, but some of the men who were kind of open to that sort of conversation. And I
Mm.
think yeah, there's just like lots of little shifts and things that happen through life, and you just start to go, oh, like who am I being?
Yeah.
How am I being received? I can't control that completely, but there's definitely I can become more aware and more conscious of what it would be like to be in my presence and my actions, and how they can be looked at in a slightly different light outside of my own perception.
Yes, yes. That's really great that you chose to investigate with questions and conversations with women that you trusted around Me Too, because it's also been pretty easy for guys to just block that entire moment and reject it because they their insecurity, perhaps inside their sense of self, can't really afford to ask those questions. And so that also says a lot about who you are. But I can see, with the PUA influence, pickup artistry, there is going to be a lot to unravel from after being
Mm.
involved in that, because I understand that it has, just really good social building skills in there, but mixed with a whole bunch of psychological coercion tactics.
Mm.
And
Mm.
to be able to decipher like what is authentic after taking all of that in and being around other people that are normalizing that, that would be quite a lot to unpack, I imagine. um, yes. And I mean, I'm having conversations now in 2025 with guys who've also had that influence in the past, and they're still unpacking. They still have questions sometimes around what really is allowed and what is not allowed. And it's just kind of crazy to me that simple things are still being worked out, but it needs to be worked out. So here we are having these conversations.
Yeah, yeah, for
like
sure.
like you said, with that perception of a woman either above you or below you, whether it's one up or one down, it's a power play, isn't it?
Mm.
It's not right there, present time, authentic human with another authentic human. There's a game that's being played. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 totally. And it's on that. I can say a lot on that because I think it's one of the things I talk to the men that I work with a lot is a lot of men I find have this idea quite kind of embedded in them, and that women hold the keys to sex, or that, women are kind of above them and they need to do things to appear to be good enough, right? And these are kind of often very nice guys, and they're very kind men, and they have taken on the very much like, yeah, men, we've done terrible things in the world and I want to be a good man. And I'm often reminding them, it's like they are a human being too, because when you say, for instance, they see a beautiful woman and they make assumptions about her confidence, her self-esteem, how she feels about herself, how easy her life is. And you have to go, actually, just remember, someone's beauty does not dictate their self-confidence. If she appears to ignore you when you go and speak to her in a bar or a club, you might relate to that experience as, oh, she's arrogant or she's rude. And I said, I've had enough conversations with women in bars and clubs and through friendships to know that she might just be really shy, right? She might be very shy, or she might think that you're so attractive. Why are you talking to her? And when we start to like slip, pull women down off a pedestal and go, actually, they have fears and worries and anxieties just like I do. We can relate to each other on a more kind of human to human level. In the same way that, some men consciously and unconsciously see women as less than, right? And they have to also, one, they have to pull themselves down a little bit and notice their own flaws and weaknesses. And I find in my work, I don't come across these men so often for one-to-one working, or maybe it's we get to the kind of subconscious of it. And usually there's this, what the reason they've done this, whether unconsciously or consciously, is like as some sort of protection mechanism because they don't feel good enough.
Yeah.
Like, and obviously we live in a society that often devalues the feminine and pushes up the masculine, and there's an aspect of that. But I find of a lot of men who come to me for work, and I think that's a very important top thing for me to say, because the men who come to me resonate with my work, is actually like this them redesigning and kind of forgiving the pain that they've experienced at the hands of women, whether that is deep projection, whether that's a mother who was enmeshed and belittling of them, or whether it's past partners that have cheated and hurt and caused them pain, abused them emotionally, physically even, is actually to realize that this woman in front of you now isn't the women that you've met before. Just because they share a gender does not make them the same. And I think this is such an important thing I'm often talking about when I talk to my clients about dating, is like we can't just project all of the stuff onto this human in front of us. Because when we do that, we're not talking to that human. We're not talking to that actual person in front of us. All we're doing is talking to this kind of avatar that we have in our brains of the kind of amalgamation of those people, those women, those men in our minds, and we're not really interacting with this person. It's like in his book, Sam Keen, what's it called? Fire in the Belly. He has this habit in the book of he uses a particular phrase or word actually when he's talking about the kind of projections of woman that we have. He uses instead of the woman or woman or women, instead of the A or the E, he puts an X in there to demonstrate how often we project like our stuff, our ideas of women onto women and not connect with them. I think it's a really like important distinction in how we kind of move through the world, especially when it comes to a perception of relating, because that projection can actually create incredible amounts of harm because we're not really present with the person in front of us.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really good point. And I'm curious to ask you about something because you mentioned this a little earlier. Where does it come from, David? This understanding that when a woman maybe says no, what is heard is not yet or not right now. And
Yeah, yeah. This kind of idea that when she says no to, I don't know, it could be anything, right? Kissing, sex, furthering the relationship. Usually kissing and sex, right? Is this kind of playing hard to get? And I remember years and years ago talking to a bunch of female friends. This I would have been, my early 20s. And they were saying to me, yep, women play hard to get because we don't want to seem easy. Because if we seem easy, then we can be judged or you're not going to value us. And I remember thinking, okay, if that's the case, then I don't understand. I've literally sat with a group of women and been like, okay, so if what is, and I've run some scenarios by them. And I remember these women were like, yep, if a woman comes to your house, like after a date, then she wants to have sex, but she just wants you to value her and not feel like you're going to discard her in the morning. And I was like, okay, understood. Okay, cool. I can work with that understanding. And I lived with that understanding, quite, I wouldn't say I was, I wouldn't say I was aggressive with it, but it was just like, okay, you said no. Okay, we can just backtrack. Maybe you don't feel comfortable enough, and so forth for a number of years. And it wasn't until there was a particular incident at my flat. And I had gone out on a date with this girl. We'd come back to my place and we had, kissing on the sofa, and then we'd kind of gone into the bedroom and we were kind of fooling around, moving through foreplay. Everything seemed fine. And there was a moment where I was like, oh, I'll get a condom. And she was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I got the condom out, I put it on. And I remember looking into her eyes and I just got this really deep sense of like, she doesn't want to have sex.
if you are a woman who wants to live beyond patriarchal sex, you're going to love the Tigress Path. It's primal feminine spirituality with deep somatic teachings and female embodiment practice. Currently, we have classes online and in person. There's the annual Tigress Bali retreat and more. So reach out on social media or go to thetigresspath.com for details.
She doesn't want to do this. And I remember just kind of stopping. I didn't say, I remember going, you're okay? And she was like, yeah, yeah. And I remember just pulling back and just like lying down next to her, kissing, cuddling, talking. And then she even said to me at one point, she's like, don't you want to have sex? And I was like, oh, you know what? It's quite late. Like we can do it in the morning. And we woke up the next day and had some breakfast. And she was like, was there something wrong last night? I was like, no. I was like, but if I'm really honest, I just got this really deep sense that you didn't really want to. And she kind of stopped and paused and was like, well, yeah, you're right. I didn't really want to. I was like, okay. And I said, oh, why didn't you say anything? And she was like, I didn't know how you would react. And at that moment, I was like, wow, okay, yeah, I understand that. I get that. I understand. Yeah. And that really shifted how I kind of approached sex in general. I started to um just slow down the whole process. Like I started to desire some obvious kind of not just signs and signals, because I always felt I was quite good at reading the signs and signals of like, stop, I'm not interested. Um, but like I wanted words of like, hey, if we are at her place, hey, should we go to the bedroom? Okay, that's a signal, right? Or she says to me, I think we should get a condom now.
Mm.
Cool. I used to want to have these sorts of signals before I wanted to kind of moving forward. Um, and this is all off the back of, I say this is when I did talk to some of my female friends and women I'd slept with, like ex-girlfriends and women I'd slept with, post me too. I asked them, I was like, did you ever feel pressured or aggressed by me? And across the board, all of them were like, not at all. Not at all. I didn't feel that at all for you. I'm like, are you sure? I was like, we could have this conversation. And it was like, no, you always felt super respectful and very in tune with what was happening and what felt right and what didn't feel right. And I was like, okay. But that incident really my shifted how I had sex, especially with someone who I didn't know particularly well.
Yeah.
If I had any feeling that this wasn't something they wanted 100%, then I would be the one who would back away until I got some very obvious signs that felt kind of fully true. And I guess later on in life, later on, probably years after that, I started to really be attuned to, even if I heard words of yes, I need to feel the yes as well. I need to feel, it doesn't have to be enthusiastic, because sometimes it won't be enthusiastic because we're nervous or it's a new person and all sorts. But I need to kind of at least feel in the body that there's like a yes, there's an opening, there's a desire. Um, and I added even a third layer in for my own kind of piece, which was I completely stopped having sex with women if I got an inkling that they wanted more than what I could offer them at that time in my life. So if there was, at times I'd come out of a relationship and I just want to be single and I wouldn't want to kind of be committed in any way. And I might be really honest about that on date one or two. And if I felt that the woman I was talking to, I could feel that she desires partnership and the sex we're about to have was in order, even if she may not be consciously aware of it, but I felt it in order to get some breadcrumbs that may lead to the thing that they actually want, I'd be a no. I'd be a no. I'd be a flat out no, because I learned that actually that is a way that as men, and we don't realize it, we can do a lot of harm to a woman. And it's not necessarily my responsibility, because a woman I'm with is fully in her power, but I also know the impact of, how do I say this without sounding really arrogant? A friend of mine once said to me, we had this conversation. He was just like, there's a lot of men out there and they don't have the skill to really like create an experience for a woman on a date that's fun, that's interesting, that's full of depth and all these things. And he said to me, he's like, a lot of women will just take our breadcrumbs because it's way better than the average man out there. And even saying that makes me feel mildly arrogant. And I really resonate. I really got what he said. I was like, yeah, I get why you're saying this. And that was one of the reasons why I was like, okay, I need to be more responsible about this. So it kind of just like added layers as I got older and older, and more, less with age, more with experience.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. I love that you're sharing this so explicitly, actually. And I want to ask you more about where you've got to be coming from inside of yourself to be that present and reading the subtle signs that are not verbally spoken. And like you said, you need to feel, the enthusiastic consent as a feeling in your own system, in your own body. Um, and also the level of sexual containment of your sexual energy as a man to be able to
Mm.
stay like once already aroused, right? Like there's connection happening and you can still pause it or stop it. Like that takes a lot internally for a man to step into that. But before we unpack that a little more, I want to say that it's actually incredibly common for women not to be clear about what they want. And so for men that care about women, for men that want to understand how to be as skilled as you are, David, about reading a woman's energy to put yourself in the optimal position, because you don't need that emotional karmic bond with someone that you don't want to connect with in a particular way. Like it brings so much disturbance to your own life to have a woman that is going through emotional turmoil because of you. So
Mm,
it's in your own favor as well, right? As well as taking care of her and being a man of higher integrity. Even if you could have, even if she said, oh no, it's okay, right? Because it's so common that women will do that. And the work that I do with women is so embodiment focused, so that she's coming from a tangible felt sense of where she's really at, and not what she thinks should be, or what she senses that you want her to be because she wants to be chosen, she wants to have a relationship, or whatever it is. So there's so many nuances and subtleties in there. And I want to share a little story with you that a friend told me just a few days ago, because I'm starting to do private and small group like research sessions for this project. And she told me a story of that someone told her. So this man and woman, they had a date, and she went back. No, I think he came to her apartment. I think that was the situation. And they had remarkably different stories the next day about what happened. And my friend knew both of them personally, and she heard the story from the man and the woman. And so what happened is they did end up having sex. And her story was that she felt basically raped and violated, and like she didn't consent. And the guy said it was really boring, uneventful sex.
mm,
He genuinely believed that that was the situation. And no, she was not verbally saying, I don't want this, but she also wasn't giving any clear clues aside from, because women have been through a lot of traumas. Women do go into freeze and dissociation, obviously, depending on individual trauma histories and things. Um, she wasn't able to access the clarity to tell him clearly that she didn't want him there. And maybe she didn't even want him in the apartment. Maybe, she was going along with it because it felt in her survival nervous system in that moment that that was the safest thing for her to do. And she can be replaying bad experiences of violation, and all these things are going on in her psyche. And so she's not present enough in her own body to say what's true. And he might be so in need following his sexual urges that he's overriding the ability to read the situation clearly. And so it's pretty astounding, isn't it, that two people in the same experience can have such vastly different reports of what happened. And both of them really believed their own story.
mm. Yeah, yeah. I've speak about this a lot because I think this kind of difference in perception, and sexually it creates a lot of harm and pain to people, but this is how we all walk through the world. We're all walking through the world every day, looking through our little lenses of how we see everything. And it's completely different from some other people, and they're having different experiences of what's going on. And it's why I think the embodiment work of feeling and being able to inhabit our bodies and widening our awareness and presence is like the most important work that we can do for ourselves.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think it's safe for men to know and to assume that, one out of three women, which is underreported. So really, like one out of two women, 50% of the women that you're going to come across have been actually raped or beaten in their lifetime, which
Mm,
means they're carrying a level of trauma that is really difficult to read sometimes and hard to predict what might happen. And So that's actual events of trauma, but every woman has experienced some kind of violation. That's like 100% if we're including harassment, 100% of women, right?
Mm,
And so it's a tricky situation. And I don't want men to feel like they're walking around on eggshells and they can't, be their authentic selves. I don't want to see that happen for men, but I do think there's a lot of room to explore the nuance in between and to be informed and to understand. And a lot of that comes from, like what you've accessed in yourself, like a more authentic connection with your own heart, because and your own body. And I know that you teach men, you call it mindful masturbation, which
mm,
I'll ask you more about that, but I'm sure it involves some circulation of sexual chi in your body, which means that it's not all focused and located only in your cock, right? Where you don't really have the conscious choice as easily to redirect that energy if needed in the moment, right? So it involves a level of self mastery that I think is essential for every man to meet inside of himself. And
mm.
it is going to give him more choice when it comes to these nuanced, intimate moments, and make him more skilled and make him a better lover, a better man, so many things. Um,
Mm.
yeah, do you see that direct connection there with the ability to be present enough to read what's right in front of you clearly as a man, with the sense of being able to contain your sexual energy like that?
Yeah, yeah. I think something you touched on earlier. A lot of men, when they get into a sexual moment, they get lost in the emotion that they're feeling. Usually lust, desire, even anxiety, right, is another one I see a lot of men talk about. When we talk about, have conversation about sex and then kind of maybe take them through visualization, and the emotions they describe as anxiety. And it's, they get lost in the lust. And sometimes there's some kind of projection of um, kind of fantasy that they might have had with this woman that they're with, or just exist in their mind, and they get lost, they be almost dissociate from the present moment, and they're kind of in this fantasy, or in the really flooded by lust. Often is the one we talk about, flooded by lust and desire. And I see through practices of mindful masturbation, even kind of nervous system practices that hold you in postures and poses that are uncomfortable and they're difficult, to be able to kind of hold that amount of charge in your nervous system while also staying present. And it's why I really love the mindful masturbation process practices. I give it to many of my clients, or the programs I'm running. It's usually looking for 15 minutes to half an hour. You start with half an hour. And the only goal is there's no goal, right? And you're not trying to get to ejaculation. And it's, someone could call it basically an edging practice, but it starts off by feeling the whole body to awaken the whole body. So like you said, so all the energy doesn't just sit in the genitals, and it's full of deep breathing, so feeling the body, feeling the energy in the body before you even touched your cock. And then when the touching starts, is slowly ramping up and holding yourself at that edge, or just before the edge of what would be close to kind of ejaculation. And during this practice consistently over months, what I've seen in clients, what I've seen in myself as well, is that you're able to, when in the moment of lust with a partner, you've got a lot more availability of your presence, because you're not hijacked by all the emotion of feeling. So you can hold yourself. Oh, yeah, I'm here. I could stay in this heightened state of pleasure, feel this woman in front of me, feel the moment, um, you know, have a more nuanced sexual experience that enables even my intuition to come through, and so forth. So it's not just kind of one track. So there's a widening of the awareness. So I see this as a really, I see it as like a vital practice for men, because it means that we're more available in the moment. We're more available to pleasure. We're more available to the person we're with, right? We're more available to the moment. We have more capacity to hold our arousal without I don't, losing control isn't the word, is like holding our arousal at the point we want it to be at. So many men I speak to are struggling with variants of kind of premature ejaculation. And a lot of that is just an inability to hold the tension, hold the arousal at a certain level. And we train our system to like be able to sit in that arousal and be okay and be present and be grounded. It could be really transformative to the experience you have. And then it makes us more available to notice, oh, actually, the woman I'm with, there's a clenching in her. There's a stiffness in her body. Oh, this doesn't actually feel good for me. Oh, maybe I'm going to stop here and go, hey, are you okay? Like I'm feeling that you're a little bit contracted or you a bit stiff or it doesn't feel like you really want to do this. Should we pause for a moment? Should we stop? Should we get some water? He's available to do that because otherwise he's not available. He's just in the lust and he's in the desire of getting some sex because he doesn't know for a lot of men, their experiences, there's some sex on offer now, and I don't know when I'm going to next have availability to have sex. And I think that's a really important thing to add in
Mm.
is this experience and belief and trust that like sex is abundant, right? There's an abundance of sex, and I don't need to take. I can just allow. I can say no today, and it could be available again tomorrow. Because if I think that if this person in front of me is offering me sex, or I can have sex with, or we can co-create some sex, um, and it's the only availability I might have for months, years even, it's going to be very, very hard for me to be really present and enjoy that. But it's going to be really, really hard for me to say no, even if it doesn't feel good.
Right, right. I'm getting this imagery of being, at this buffet with the most delicious food, and you don't need to gorge yourself immediately, right?
Mm.
Like you can come back another time, you can come back in an hour, the next day, whatever. Yeah, yeah, beautiful. I'm really glad you added that in there. And I'm getting from what you're sharing how learning semen retention practice is actually a really great way for men to learn how to feel their feelings because that's part of it, isn't it? I mean,
Mm.
yes, you're increasing your capacity to hold erotic charge and sensation and meet sensation in your body, but there's feelings that come along with that too. There's emotion that you might need to face in the process as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I've reported clients who have burst into tears after practice, because they've realized they've never been that tender with themselves, or they've never had anyone be as tender as they were in that moment. These are men in their 30s and 40s, and they're like, my God, I've just spent half an hour caressing myself, being slow with myself, using beautiful oils, having a beautiful scent, dressing my room up in like a boudoir and listening to some beautiful music. And I've never had that experience of another woman treat me in that way. And it's left them to have to feel what's underneath there, right? There's the sadness, the grief. Um, and then I've also spoken to men who've just burst into laughter, you know, like, and men who found themselves softening, men that found themselves shunning porn because they're like, I don't need porn to get aroused.
Mm.
I can do it myself with myself. And then that has another knock-on effect of how they stop objectifying women and start to meet women in a very different way. So yes, you're completely right. Like it brings up feelings and emotions. Sometimes I have them journal afterwards. Like journal, how did that feel for you? What came up for you? What story were you telling yourself before you did that, or what that would be like? And you start to mine and understand, a lot of the um programming that we receive about sex and how it has to be. And our stories about, like I said, about needing to get it now or rush or the shame that we hold around um masturbation as well. And one thing I like to add in for them if we're working together for a little while is to get them to sit and do it in front of a mirror. It's really powerful to look at your own self, your own body, your own cock, playing with yourself and noticing the shadow that comes up, the judgment you have, the way you might try and belittle your body and your cock and so forth. And noticing that and then again a journaling with that. And then I take them on another level, which is affirmations, looking at their cock and worshipping their own cock. Because there's something that, often as men, we are taught to really just be very unkind to our own cocks constantly. you know,
Mhm.
and it really sticks with us, and it really kind of embeds itself in our minds.
That's so beautiful. So, so beautiful. And there's obviously female versions of all of this as well that women really need to do too. But I want to focus on the male experience with you in front of me here today. Would you say that this is true, David? I've heard a few guys say this that, with not a lot of encouragement to feel everything and learn how to process emotion as a boy and as a young man, whether that's from family influences or just influences in the culture, that unconscious masturbation, especially to porn, can set up this disconnect from feeling, and it's like if you're feeling a lot, just dissipate the energy through ejaculating in a mindless way, right?
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. So often, a lot of men use masturbation as a self-regulation practice, a way to self-regulate. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling worried. I'm feeling a feeling in my body that feels too much for me to be with, to hold. Let me dissipate it. Ejaculation, masturbation. Sorry, ejaculation and done. So the kind of holding a feeling and emotion and being like, oh, I can be with this feeling, this anxiety, and actually then getting curious, like, what is this anxiety? What's the story that I have that I'm telling myself about my life and my world and myself that's creating this anxiety? And we, as young men, we're not really taught how to be with our emotions. It's schooled out of us from a very young age. There's some really great research, around the man box and so forth that shows how the bullying happens. So there's a really an education that we need as men, and um it's not a quick fix, you know. It's not a like go and do a 6 week course and suddenly you're going to be a fully fledged feeling man. Like I still have my edges where I can still see like, oh, I can feel more deeply, or I can embody my feelings a little bit more to allow them to be there and to move through them. It's a kind of never ending practice of life, I feel, to kind of undo a lot of that programming because it runs very deep in our culture, in our society, through the media, the way that we talk to men. It runs within women as well. um so it's a really vital thing for our well-being, that
Yes.
ability to feel, to express, to speak. Like I run a community of men at the moment, and one of the things we do every time we meet is that we just talk. We just express how we're feeling. And it's easy as a man to think, oh, that's not going to do me any good. But so often the men come off the corner like, man, I just feel so much better about how I'm feeling. Like I'm more accepting, I'm more okay with it. Or I found actually just by speaking out loud to a group of men and hearing how they're feeling, I actually came to a insight or a conclusion or a solution for what's going on in my life. And that's just by having the space to feel, take us into the body, feel what's there, notice, get to maybe a deeper aspect of what's underneath there, and then express that and be listened to and heard, and kind of the seen as like no ridicule, just acceptance from a group of other men. And that in itself can be really transformational for a man's feeling capacity.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And it seems really important for adult men, young men to make a very clear distinction that, because you said masturbation is a way that a man will emotionally self-regulate his nervous system, even without realizing that's what he's doing, of course. But it seems like a really important distinction to make because the unconscious version of that, where he's cutting off from feeling, that's not actual true emotional regulation. That's dissociation, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's only truly emotionally regulating him if his heart is connected in the experience, if there is that circulation of his energy in his body, if he is meeting feelings of shame and moving through it and breathing it out and all of the beautiful things that you teach to the guys. Because when we use this terminology and apply it to something, that's not quite accurate, it can make someone think, like smoking cigarettes as a way of regulating my nervous system. And it's like, well, actually, it's an attempt to regulate your nervous system, but what it actually is emotional suppression.
Exactly that. There's so many great suppression tools out there that are kind of masquerading as self-regulation. and often you can spot them because they're easy, really easy to access. They do it for you. You don't have to do any work for it, like drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, like, even masturbation. It's like it doesn't take any, you just do the thing and then everything happens. Whereas, a good breath practice, you have to be really present to what you're feeling. You have to consciously be with the breath. The same with a good meditation practice or even a shaking practice. That takes a level of presence. A lot of the kind of masquerading, the faux self-regulation tools, they don't require any presence from you.
Yes, yes. And it's sad. It's a sad reality that it's so common and normalized that dissociation is a lot of men's experience of their own sexuality. Like that's just a sad reality. It doesn't have to be like that. And yet that's what's been normalized in the culture, hasn't it?
And it's similar with women, right? We've normalized this culture of dissociation. We watch porn that's dissociating because then we project our desire onto a screen and we don't know how to feel that in our own bodies. And we're all, for the most part, a lot of people are having this very dissociated sex that's actually really harmful to them. And it often looks like the men are having a great time and it's the women that are having a terrible time. And when I speak to men about the sex they're having, so many men are having sex they're not actually enjoying. They're not actually feeling pleasure. There's no focus on pleasure. There's focus on outcome, which actually for them often creates a lot of stress for them. So we're all dissociating and having sex we don't want to have because we don't know how to come back to our bodies and feel and be present. And we don't know how to talk about it with one another so that we could actually go, oh, you're not enjoying that. I'm not really enjoying that. What would you enjoy? You'd enjoy that. Oh my God, that sounds great. Let's do that. We're not having that simple conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is getting to that topic that I wondered might be a little edgy, because when we were chatting prior, you mentioned some of the things that your clients are going through typically. And you said, how did you say it? Like centering female pleasure in sex, centering
Mm,
the woman in,
yeah.
yeah. Is that what you were just mentioning?
Yeah. So I've got quite a few clients that come to me and they giving men. They want to be great men. The men who are like, I want to be a great man. And by being a great man, I center a woman's pleasure in sex. There might be what we call kind of nice guy suffering with nice guy syndrome, coined by I say suffering, it's probably a harsh term. They are kind of embodying the aspects of nice guy syndrome, coined by Dr. Robert Glover. So they put all their attention on the woman. She has to feel lots of pleasure. She has to orgasm once, twice, three times. And they mean really well, but they're putting all their attention there. And they're like, oh no, no, but I'm okay. Like it doesn't matter. I don't have needs. I don't have sexual needs. And some of these men, I'm like, okay. And then they have partners that reinforce this. So maybe their partners are, you know, women won't necessarily like this, but are a bit selfish. So they make it all about their experience. Um, I've had clients who, for example, suffer from premature ejaculation. When they ejaculate quickly or early, their partners berate them and belittle them, and go, oh, it's not you, you've enjoyed yourself, but never really checking that actually as a man actually felt pleasure. And he's feeling shame, he's feeling badly about himself, and then he's left with this other um, layer of like, oh, now my partner's angry with me on top of this. So I do a work with men who like centering female pleasure so much that they completely negating their own, right? They might, spend an hour and a half, caressing and kissing their partner's body, ensuring that she orgasms, he feels this beautiful pleasure. And then at the end of it, having 3 minutes for himself, just to kind of quote unquote finish off. And then that's it. And he's like, oh, how was that for you? And she's like, oh my God, that was so amazing. You're so amazing, blah, blah, blah. And then the question doesn't even come back his way. He's always curious about her needs, like, what would you like more of, blah, blah, blah. But the question never comes back his way. And I'm not saying that this is the norm, but I'm saying that when certain types of men who really are focused and really understand the damage that men have made and they want to be good men, they actually go a bit too far and they completely decenter themselves as needing to experience pleasure, or they struggle to even express their needs and desires sexually. Sometimes there's even some kind of shame around having desires and needs, because they're like, oh, but if I have needs and desires, that means I'm taking. I don't want to take from a woman. I just want to give and give, which is a beautiful sentiment to have. But
Mm.
a co-created experience is much more pleasurable for both people.
Yes, yes. And I wonder what percentage of the population of men are experiencing that, because my sense is it's probably a minority, maybe.
Mm. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
um,
I'm not out here saying most men are experiencing this, but there's this a very a, a minority of men come to me and work with me and come to the other coaches that I know. But there's definitely, if there's some level of sexual problem in the, I don't like to say sexual problem, that sexual issue in the relationship, I'd say about 20 to 30% of the men that I come across from a sexual point of view, this is what's going on.
I'm personally here for the substance of this work and the research project, not for the likes. But if you want to see interesting and prominent speakers become part of this research, there are two things that you could do right now to help make that happen. First one is to follow the Tigress Path on Instagram or Spotify, and to leave a 5-star rating with a review if you can on Apple. These two things genuinely help so much to get this podcast and research on the radar of those who can help expand the conversation wider. And may we all be free from suffering. Yeah,
This
yeah,
is something they're dealing with.
yeah. And when I feel into that situation, I can tell that they aren't actually in an intimate connection, like a present heart consciousness connection. They're trying to do all the physical things to please the woman. And so part of not centering themselves, like they're not actually, riding the energy with, full self, full body contact with each other, so
Mm.
it gets lost along the way, right? So that sounds like it's easily recovered, but it means feeling more. And actually, it might be a
Mm.
way of avoiding feeling on behalf of
Mm.
them. Yeah.
Yes, yes. It's a way to avoid feeling, and but also experience the sensation of winning.
Mm.
I'm successful. I'm good at sex. I'm a better man than most men. It's this same piece that we kind of talked about around kind of patriarchal sex, of like experiencing this, like, I'm doing a good job. I'm a good man. I'm winning. Not so much the taking, but there's still the sensation of kind of winning that can be felt by their standards of what winning are.
Yeah, it's super interesting. There's so many different dynamics in it all, isn't there? And I actually had wondered if what you really meant was men that think that they are focusing on the woman's pleasure, but in order to do that, they need her to have a certain outcome, because this is what a lot of women that I work with experience from guys. Like, there's a sense of pressure, that she needs
Mm.
to orgasm, and that, he doesn't really allow the time and spaciousness that her body might need. So he might think that he's focusing on her pleasure, but she's not experiencing that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. It becomes another way in which we are trying to make our outcome happen, instead of being with like the moment to moment pleasure that can be accessed and available to both people. And when I spoke to this to a number of men, like, I was like, we have the orgasm gap, and it's a really real thing that we need to kind of do something about. And I see that you're trying to be a good man. You're trying to, like, I'm trying to close the orgasm gap. But the danger there is we're just the metric turns sex into something that should be measured of winning and success, good or bad. And we miss out on pleasure. We miss out on that angle of pleasure and presence as also something that's valuable, because in your head, what you have in your head is like, okay, this is the technique that I learned from this book that I read. And I know that women want to orgasm and that makes them happy. And I want to make her happy. So I'm going to do this technique, but I'm still kind of in my head. I'm still disconnected from my heart. I might even be still disconnected from her as well because I'm trying, my focus is on this outcome. So I'm still trying to race to get somewhere, right? That isn't just being here now, feeling present, responding, flowing with what is.
Yes, yes, I got you. So connection is missing in both instances. Like these guys you're working with is a very particular kind of guy, and the woman might be genuinely thoroughly enjoying herself, but connection between the two of them is missing. And so it's like there's still a covert performative approach
Mm,
sex, where it's more overt with the guys that just need her to have a certain outcome because it's actually about him. He's saying that it's about her, but he's actually centering himself a lot in his own mind rather than truly being close and in contact and experiencing, the co-creation in the way that that could unfold if there's real intimacy happening, not just sexual, physical.
yeah, yeah, exactly that. It's still centering himself because of the validation that he needs to receive. He's wanting to feel validated, and it's still the unconscious centering of his what he wants. He thinks he's centering her, and he's make it. He's trying to, but it's still about him. Like, oh, I failed. He might be disappointing if it doesn't happen in the way that he thinks it should happen. Right?
Yeah.
He might feel sad. He could even get angry. Right? Um, and this is, guys don't often tell me. They will tell me that they feel they failed. I speak to men. They're like, oh, I felt like I. I feel like I'm failing with my partner. I'm like, oh, why is that? And like, oh, she never orgasms. I'm like, oh, okay. Have the two of you spoken about it? No. What's does she told you? Have you sat with her while she self pleasures to learn? Maybe she has a particular technique that she needs or a particular way to be touched. Have you talked about that? No, we haven't talked about that. I just feel
Right.
like a failure, you know. So it's this. It's there, and like you said, it is also a part of avoiding feeling, you know,
Yes.
but also creating the cycle of failure as well. Men don't want to feel like they're failing. They want to feel like they're being good men. They want to feel like they're succeeding. But this dynamic of making all about orgasm can create this whole dynamic of feeling like a failure, of feeling not good enough.
Yes, yes, for sure. And on the woman end of that, often the ability to fully let go is connected to feeling emotionally safe. And if that's
Mm,
missing, she's not going to totally physically let go.
yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, there's so much flow in this conversation. It's such a rich topic to open up. But I can see we're coming to the end of the time. But I just wanted to highlight something else that you'd mentioned about men wanting to learn about Tantra, which is basically the experience we're starting to talk about here of expanded pleasure, but also the deep intimacy together with that. Um, but men wanting to learn about Tantra and kind of being ridiculed for it.
Mm, yeah, yeah. There's if you notice, there's a huge amount of kind of if you go into a sex toy shop, right? A sex shop, there will be five, there's four walls, three and a half of those walls will be dedicated to female pleasure, right? And there might be one sliver on one side of a few fleshlights and stuff for men. When it comes to kind of male pleasure and seeking more pleasure, pleasure is an important point here, not just conquering or more sex or um, conquering and more sex. Pleasure, men kind of see that as like, oh, why am I? We've been told that pleasure is not important, like rest. We don't rest, we hustle constantly. So if a man is wanting to learn about sex, the first thing that he thinks of, and I've had many men said it, is like, well, if I need to learn about this means that something wrong with me. I'm doing something wrong, right? I should know how to do this. It's a really common sentence I hear around sex and also around dating and relationships. Is people like, I should know how to do this. And if I don't know how to do this, there's something wrong with me because everybody else knows how to do this, which is completely untrue, right? We know we wouldn't have jobs if it wasn't the case. But when it comes to wanting to learn more, I've experienced this a number of, I studied at a tantra school here in London for a few years. And it was one of the things I talked to with the other men there. We had like men's groups and stuff. And there was once a question was asked, was like, oh, like, do you tell people in your lives that you come here on a weekly basis? And virtually every man was like, I tried to tell people and they just kind of laughed at me. They were like, oh, you're going to orgies every week. And oh, I bet you can last for like 2 hours now. And instead of actually asking about the question, they just got ridicule and projection and laughed at. And you might get the odd person, who, when everyone's stopped ridicule you, takes you to one side and goes, hey man, what are you learning at this tantra place? Like, could I come along? There might be that one person, but usually the first thing you're met with is ridicule and laughter and so forth. And this is straight out of the man box playbook. This subtle bullying to keep you in the narrow band of what a man should talk about. You shouldn't talk about depth. You shouldn't talk about having beautiful, deeply connected sex, because that's a deep topic and it's not football, sports, or money. So, even when men come to work with me often, I often say, I'm like, oh, who do you tell that you're doing this work with me if it's around sex, or even if it's around kind of general masculinity and relationships? 9 times out of 10, nobody. I'm not telling anybody. No one knows that I'm here talking to you. So we hide this aspect of learning because of what we receive from other people around us, or we perceive, or we assume that we will receive, because that's the kind of culture that us men we live in, is this culture of like, anything that starts straying out of this narrow band of what a man should be talking about doing with himself, we're all going to bully him, we're going to laugh at him and ridicule him so he gets back into his lane.
Yeah, yeah, it is the sad reality, right? And thank you for being one of
Mm.
those men who've busted yourself out of that box and explored beyond it. Because women want and need a man who has that capacity, because female sexual energy is quite honestly far more powerful. Like the level of stamina that a woman's body naturally has, unless a man learns these skills, he cannot truly meet her energy sexually. And that in itself causes so many other relationship problems, and also it's cutting himself off from so much incredible pleasure potential if he doesn't explore beyond that box, and yeah, I feel for these guys that are saying that they're not being, not just they're not being encouraged, they're being shut down. But also that place that's like, I shouldn't have to learn something. It's like, why can't we learn? Why can't we be forever learning how to optimize our human experience, And but when it does come to Tantra, because I have worked with men a lot on a hands-on bodywork level, showing them how to access their deeper primordial current in their body without having to believe anything or understand anything. And I got to have this really cool experience where any kind of man, any age, any culture, it doesn't matter his philosophy, how serious he was, if he was willing to have an experience in his body, it will activate with every single man, and it
Mm.
was really great for me as a woman to see that it's potentially possible with every single man. It's not just some men, every man has this in him if he's, in the right environment to feel safe enough to activate this power inside of him. Like anything that's telling a man to keep that down is not in his favor. It's so disempowering. So yeah, I kind of feel like my clients and your clients need to connect because women do want to meet men that are on that path more and more, and they often have trouble finding them, because there's so much pornographic programming in a man that he hasn't deprogrammed himself from. He hasn't unpacked that and deconstructed that enough to be able to have really deep, profound 4-hour lovemaking, lush experiences, which
Yeah.
everyone's capable of, actually.
Yep. Everyone's capable of it. They're willing to put their attention to it.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. So it sounds fantastic, the work you're doing with the guys. So if any guys are listening and they want to connect with you, what kind of things you're offering at the moment and how should they find you?
Mm. Yeah. At the moment, I'm available to work with people one-to-one. I'm also running a kind of men's community, a place where men can come together. We mainly meet on Zoom, but we also meet in person, where we come together and actually do the work. Talk about the things that are important to us. Um, have conversations, hold each other accountable, be supportive, practice depth with each other, get into embodiment practice together. So that's something that's available to join over the next kind of month. And then the other way to work with me, one of the things I also run is I run a program for avoidant men, men who could kind of are avoidantly attached, because I think there's a really underserved man in the market of kind of dating relationships. And that's a program that I also run for men. Um, and yeah, the best place to probably find me, most definitely the place to find me is on Instagram. You can find me at the authentic man underscore. I'm very active on Instagram, usually posting four to 7 times a week, depending on the week.
Amazing. And I noticed that you are a father as well, which I want to mention
Mm,
because I know that that brings so much more dimension and depth and maturity to how you can guide men to really step into being the authentic men that they're capable of being.
yeah, it's a whole initiation fatherhood that comes with so much, having to stretch one's capacity very quite quickly to hold that. It's been a real ride.
Yeah, so beautiful. Well, thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing in the world and for meeting with me today. I'll put your links in the notes for everyone to connect with you. And yeah, just thank you for being the man that you are.
Oh, thank you for such a beautiful conversation, Debeshi.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please do share it around on social media. And know that everyone is invited to be part of our research in the anonymous survey. Your contribution will help reveal the exact ways men and women can live beyond patriarchal sex and find greater harmony together. You can find the link to our survey and also details on the Tigress Path for Women via thetigresspath.com.